changing
the world.
I don't know if you read Persepolis.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I'm actually working with the UN and UNICEF, and we're trying to do a whole line.
We're going to get started now with this panel on new tactics to transform economies in the Middle East and North Africa region. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Rana Foroohar. I'm a global business columnist and associate editor at the Financial Times, and I'm really, really pleased to be here moderating this panel today. I'll introduce our panelists briefly. We're going to talk amongst ourselves for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to open up to questions from you all, and I'm sure that you will have many good ones. So let me start by first introducing on my right, His Highness Prince Fahad Al Saud. On my left, Sheikh Mashoul bin Hamad Al Thani. On the far right here, Youssef Al Attaba, the ambassador of the UAE to the United States. And on the far left, Mohammed Baraj, who's the managing director, Guggenheim KBBO Partners. And I should have mentioned as well that His Highness Prince Fahad is also the founder and CEO of NAM, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and that Sheikh Mashoul is the ambassador of the state of Qatar to the US. So thank you all for being here. It's an interesting and challenging time to be talking about the Middle East. I'm actually quite pleased that this is a panel about economic development. We know that the region has been in conflict for the last few years. Many countries in civil war, 15 million people displaced, slower growth, diminishing job prospects in a lot of places, many challenges. But there are also opportunities. There's a tremendous amount of diversification going on, as anybody who's been to the region recently will know. And there's also the issue of demographics, which has been presented and can be very much a challenge in the Arab world, but in the context of economic growth globally is actually an opportunity. One of the interesting points that was made at the IMF meetings last week in Washington was that basically the world is suffering from a demographic slowdown. This is cutting growth in almost every region, but the Middle East is one of the few regions where demographics are really quite positive. So there's an opportunity in a young population as well, and we're going to talk about some of these things and how to transform challenges into opportunities. So I'm going to start actually with Prince Fahad, because I have been, not only because you know about youth culture, but I have been fascinated to read about and hear about what you are doing around entrepreneurship, around capturing the possibilities of this large population of young people in your own country and in the region. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your company and also what you've done in the technology and culture sphere.
Well, thank you for having me. I think we'll just dive into it. My company is called NAM, which is an abbreviation for New Arab Media. And the concept behind that, what inspired it, is really trying to fight against the one-sided story narrative that has plagued our region for generations. I found myself, when I was a student here in the US, being almost limited to certain identities or certain stereotypes. I was, questioning them because I wasn't the one that created them. And so I realized that that's a problem that my whole generation is facing. And the concept behind New Arab is reintroducing this generation, is giving an opportunity for us to define ourselves, building a platform so we can share our voice and counteract what exists out there. I think it's really important to understand that the number we throw around, the 70%, is not just a random number. These are the 70% of our population are actively, they're more educated than any of the generations past. They have more opportunities and tools for them, and they're hungry. And what we're trying to do with our company and also with them generally as a generation is trying to open doors and new channels for the progress that's already happening on the ground to be shared with the rest of the world. It's really important to understand that just like any entrepreneurial movement, there needs to be support and there needs to be education. And what we're hoping to achieve as a young generation is to, first and foremost, aligned with the mission of the company, is to connect native Arabs with displaced Arabs around the world. Joining these two forces, an Arab who's third, fourth generation Brazilian, their perspective and their how they view themselves and how they're also viewed is really important and needs to be embraced. And so building these channels of communication between these two young generations that have grown separately but have shared the same problems is super important. And it's all you need to look at is just to go online to see all the movements that are happening. Social media here is an extension of existing platforms. It's the thing you do to get to the next level. Because of our region is still developing in many cases, social media has proven to be the platform, the foundation. And the way we use it is completely different than how the rest of the world does. I think the biggest challenge that we have and what we're trying to invite here and why I'm so excited to be here, and one as a personification, an embodiment of the young generation that's moving forward out of our region, is we're trying to invite you to get to know us and to get to know us, this new Arab generation that's coming to light, and help you correct some of the information that has been disseminated, because it doesn't do anybody any justice, really, and we can't really get to the next level until we get to know each other better.
Okay, I'm going to come back in a minute and ask you to draw out some of the amazing stories of the books and the comics and the projects you're working on, because they're really quite interesting. But let me come to you, Sheikh Mashal, and ask you a little bit about this cultural question as well, and using culture as a way to diversify, frankly, away from hydrocarbons and kind of figure out a way in the knowledge economy for the Arab world to take its place. Maybe you can talk about the Qatari experience.
Thank you very much, Rana, and it's a great opportunity to be here. In fact, we have embarked on this transformation in Qatar since 1995. However, 2008 marked a very important year for us, where we launched the Qatar Vision 2030. Of course, the pillars of this vision is economic development, social development, environmental development. However, the human development is at the core of this. And we have emphasized on education. Our objective is to reach an economy that is knowledge-based, driven. So we truly believe that in order to achieve this objective, we need to emphasize on education, promote a reform of education itself. We need to promote critical education. So Qatar Foundation is working on that. We are trying to establish a platform where these young and bright generations coming and graduating have these tools to implement their objectives in life, which is...
What are the tools? Tell us about what is being reformed particularly.
So if we look about the challenges, and not only in the Gulf region, let's say in MENA as a whole, we can see that the youth are priorities: better education, better job opportunities, better food and nutrition, better healthcare, and the responsive government. So in that, we need to address these challenges. So there is a mismatch between university graduates and the job market. There is
in many countries.
In many countries. There is also weak banking systems. There are also limited access to finance. These are the issues that we need to resolve in order for the new generation to be able to achieve their objectives. So, for example, one of the tools is the Qatar Technology and Scientific Park. It's a research. It's helping graduates to implement their ideas and partner them up with companies. Another tool, what we've done in Doha is restructure the Qatar Development Bank in order to provide these banking systems to promote more entrepreneurship. Of course, it's a long journey. However, we are very glad to say that we're on the right track, and we hope that we will achieve our objectives.
Okay, we're going to touch on a number of those things, educational reform, technology, culture, in other ways in a moment. But Ambassador, let me come to you, because you all in the UAE have also done a lot with diversification. You gave me a statistic that 70% actually now of your economy is not oil and gas based. Tell me about that process. When did it start? What were the key turning points, and where do you still have to go?
Sure. We started, first of all, let me start by thanking the Milken Institute for having us. The journey of diversification started in practice probably about 20 years ago, in execution probably closer to 15. And if you look at any oil producing country today, and if you look at the GDP, yes, 70% is non-oil and gas. 70% focuses on services, financial services, real estate, tourism. Tourism today in the UAE, which is a country the size of the state of Maine, that has 10 million people, is 12% of our GDP. In 2016, we had 25 million tourists. 25 million. So, and if you ask any UAE official today, they'll tell you 70% is still not good enough. We're trying to drive it up to 80, 90%. Because the reality is, one day, we are going to run out of oil. And when you run out of oil, and oil is 70% of your GDP, you're going to be in trouble. So despite the diversification, I think one of the things we're trying to achieve is being a model that others can replicate. It's not that we've invented a secret sauce that no one else has. What we've done is can be easily replicated in many of the countries and economies around us. But because we got a head start, I think we are where we are today. If you look at Dubai, Dubai doesn't have much oil. 27% of Dubai's GDP is from Emirates Airlines and the airport. 20% is Dubai Ports World and Jebel Ali operation. And so you have to identify what your core competencies are, what your comparative advantage is, what your skill sets are, and you start building the partnerships with other companies and other businesses that allow you to take it to 70 and 80%. But sooner or later, our leadership has come to the conclusion that when oil runs out, we do not want to be in a position where we don't know what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. All right, we're going to come back in sort of the replicability question and the lessons that could be spread out. But Mohammed, I want to come to you now. You're an expert in the capital markets, and not just big business and banks, but how to best funnel productive capital to SMEs, which is a really, really important part of this story. And again, not just frankly in the MENA region, but globally, finding those opportunities for smaller businesses, which of course create the majority of jobs, is important. So how does that happen? What needs to happen in the region to get capital to small and mid-sized businesses?
Sure. Thanks, Rana. Your Highness, Your Excellencies, I'm privileged to be part of the panel with you, so just a quick start. I think the role of the SMEs cannot be overemphasized in the region. SMEs, in terms of contribution to the economy and the job creation kind of mandate, it's just a major contributor. In the UAE, where I'm based, SMEs kind of contribute around 60% of GDP. Countries like in Egypt, which is very strong in terms of demographics and population growth, it goes all the way to 80%. In Lebanon, for example, it goes all the way to 99%. So SMEs are catalysts to economic diversification, innovation, and a knowledge-based economy. The UAE, again, just because I'm privileged to be part of this country for the past decade, have done a lot of initiatives to kind of sponsor SME initiatives, all the way from the leadership, from His Highness, President Khalifa, all the way to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, and his recent initiative around the SME 100, whereby they kind of provide SME 100 ranking. In terms of a lot of this made the kind of the environment conducive for investments, and around half of the 100 kind of top startups in the region are based in the UAE. It made it it incubated two kind of big names, which we heard recently about, the Careem of the region, which is the Uber of the Middle East, and most recently Souq.com, which was acquired by Amazon. which kind of gives us proves two things. One is that the region can provide big exits for investors, and two, in terms of having a company like Amazon come and have a plug and play. Amazon, when they went to India, they built their operations ground up. And that's why they were careful in their international expansion. But when it came to kind of a company based out of the UAE, it was more like a simple plug and play. Until now, this deal is kind of the highest value in terms of a tech company in the Arab world. A key challenge for SMEs, which we all know about, and His Excellency touched upon, is in relation to access to capital. And this is where it becomes very challenging. And recently, Saudi Arabia is kind of at the forefront of capital markets reform. Announced the establishment of a parallel market called Numu. It's only designed for SME companies, and it's not only for Saudi companies. They've been getting inquiries from the region. So that's another kind of catalyst towards the equity capital markets. In terms of the gap, according to the IFC, it's around $260 billion. PEs, financial sponsors, and other VCs are trying to kind of bridge this gap, but it's not enough. We've seen, and on the technology kind of point, we've seen kind of online platforms around the crowdfunding emerge, and that's both on equity as well as peer-to-peer lending. So I think in terms of SME, from the GCC all the way to the kind of Levant region, all the way to North Africa, there have been a lot of kind of challenges, but again, access to capital always is kind of the most significant one at the moment.
Let me ask you one follow-up question to that. When you're thinking about access to capital, where are the sort of challenges and the roadblocks? Is it in getting capital-rich institutions, angel investors, VCs to really believe the story on the ground? Is it about the skill set of the entrepreneurs and making them presentable enough to go to the capital markets and really sell themselves and say, you know, here is a great business plan, here, you know, where are the challenges?
I mean, it's all about having the right intermediary, and what they call here in the US kind of incubators that kind of help you get access to those angel investors. Now we've seen a lot of kind of new ventures that are sponsoring those initiatives. I mean, the main caveat, and we had a discussion earlier to the MENA, is so considerably diverse, and again, it has some common grounds that you can mutually look at from different perspectives, but it's in terms of access to investors. There's a lot of kind of moves to get this kind of international access to investors, and I think Amazon's deal and the recent Japanese investment in Careem is an example to that.
Okay, great. Prince Fahad, I'm going to turn to you now because you have a really interesting perspective on technological development in the region. You were at the forefront of rolling out Facebook in the Arab world in 2008. You joined?
2008, yeah.
2008. So tell us a little bit. I mean, social media has transformed the Middle East, we know, but tell us about your experience. What was it like to roll out that product in the Arab world, and what has it meant economically, culturally, politically?
I mean, the driving factor really behind that was when I noticed a lot of, early on, we had to approve a lot of the content, and Facebook groups was something really new. And what I noticed, so I was in charge at the time about like 20 million accounts. And what I noticed, there was this recurring trend of businesses from Saudi Arabia that are run by women, and one of them happened to be someone I actually know. So, and I questioned that. I was like, okay, how did you even figure out how to do this? Because it wasn't even rolled out in Arabic yet. And that's because they were part of the 1% or the top percent that hadn't, education, I guess. And what that inspired me to, and inspired the team, is we understood that this is technology now was being presented as an opportunity to bypass a lot of the obstacles and restrictions that happen in any society, whether it's movement restriction, whether it's you're in a conflict-ridden area. And what we understood is that if we can take that little 1%, and by just adding it, localizing it and introducing it in Arabic, as you've seen, the whole region completely changed. And where we are today is that 35% of entrepreneurs in the Middle East are women compared to 10% globally. And that completely shifted everything. The most popular businesses in the Middle East when it comes to social media are businesses targeted towards women.
Why is that? Why women in social media?
Well, because men have had opportunities and had privilege for the longest time. They've been able to go and exercise that. They've never had to even think of how can I get out of the house, or if that even is a possibility. And funny enough, culturally, at least in Saudi, it was very traditional for women to start businesses from their homes, whether it's cooking, something as simple as cupcakes and distributing it, or going house to house and actually selling goods. So it just took what was now private and public, but what they didn't understand and where the opportunity was is now they're connected to the rest of the world. And the biggest example, I guess, or success story from that period was a fashion designer in Saudi who, as a result of being on that platform, ended up within 2 years showing at Fashion Week.
That's interesting. This is reminding me of a McKinsey statistic I saw looking at how SMEs, not just in the Arab world, but globally, 80% were now able to do cross-border business because of these platforms, so that they could ramp up much more quickly. Ambassador, are you finding that social media platforms are having a transformative experience, for entrepreneurs in the UAE as well? Or?
I know a young woman who is just graduating from NYU Abu Dhabi right now and on her way to Oxford, who said to me, I said, "What social media platforms are you on?" She said, "All of them." Then she said, "We have a saying, among our generation." I'm the old guy here, by the way, now. She said, "If it didn't happen in social media, then it didn't happen." And so I think, yes, I think in the UAE, the reason I think the Amazon deal for Souq is such a big vote of confidence is it lends legitimacy. It tells us that what we're doing, the ecosystem we're setting up, the infrastructure we're setting up, the talent that is coming to our region, that is showing up in our region, is being appreciated by the big guys in Silicon Valley. Jeff Bezos would not have come to the UAE. And by the way, he had never been to the Middle East. He visited the UAE, I want to say, about 3 or 4 months ago. I organized the UAE visit for him, and it was his first time to that part of the world ever. And a few months later, the deal gets done. So that kind of puts us on the map for that sector. And I think if Amazon can do it, then others can do it. And it just, again, lends credibility to what we've been trying to do. And I think to Prince Fahd's point, the stereotypes that we sometimes have to endure, the images that we have to deal with, these young people and these social media platforms can destroy that, I think, very, very quickly.
That is fascinating. Let's talk actually a little bit about education, come back to some of the points that you were making earlier, Sheikh Mashal, because economics tells us that in order for the benefits of technology to be widely shared, education has to keep pace. You've got to have a population that basically can harness these opportunities, not just the 1%, as you say. So, and I'd like everybody to join in. In your regions, what are you seeing that's working in terms of educational reform, and what needs to be done?
Well, for a start, the partnership with the U.S. academic institutions are essential in this. I mean, Qatar Foundation is hosting 6 campuses from the U.S.
Which universities?
To mention some: Cornell University, Georgetown, Carnegie Mellon, Texas A&M, Virginia Commonwealth, and this hub of education is essential for the transformation. You bring a new way of education to the region. It does not serve only Qatar, but it serves the MENA region, and with new ideas and new innovation in education is implemented on this platform. So I think for start is the partnership. Again, we need to also provide them with a platform that will pick them up after education.
Meaning what exactly?
As my friend over here said business incubators, for example. In Qatar, we are trying to implement this concept. However, I don't think today it is enough.
Are there any of these incubators that are actually connecting the existing campuses to investors, really knitting together job creators?
And today what you have is incubators, the traditional incubators, where after school they go a startup and then they're carried out. But what Qatar Foundation is trying to do, push these incubators inside the universities. So it will encourage students, while they are studying with innovative ideas, be connected with the business community and be guided by the business community. Therefore, at the graduation, they are ready to enter the job market.
Mohammed, I'd like you to pick up on this thread, and I'm particularly curious, in the investment, since you're looking at all this through the eyes of the investment community, what sectors are you really seeing innovation in? Where do you see gaps in human capital? Where do you see areas of education that could help bolster the things that you're trying to do?
I mean, the first thing that comes on my mind is healthcare, which is just because of social responsibility kind of framework, and just touching on that. In terms of kind of doctors, or more specifically nursing staff, currently, at least in the UAE, there's around 99% of the nursing staff is non-Emirati.
That's interesting.
So it becomes very hard, then they have a high churn rate. So you want to kind of maintain this quality of care momentum all the way from admission until the patient is discharged. It becomes difficult when you have this high churn rate. And I think the kind of health authorities are doing something around it. In terms of innovation, I think the Amazon, again, Souk deal, I would say there's the era before Souk Amazon and there's the era after Souk Amazon. It's going to create a lot of competition when it comes to e-commerce. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know the last time I went to the shopping mall to kind of buy some electronic gadget, for example. I think the brick and kind of mortar industry is going to be challenged. But again, volumes and traffic in the EU is going to keep up with this. Another sector in terms of innovation has to do with financial services. We've seen a lot of kind of innovation in that sector when it comes to fintech, especially in our part of the world. I can literally do almost everything on my mobile. It's kind of part of UAE's kind of initiative to have the country smart, and it is basically making us lazy per se.
Well, it's one of the areas in which emerging markets are actually ahead in some cases in terms of mobile app and banking.
It's unbelievable. You just can get everything done on your mobile.
Rana, can I make a quick observation about education? I was at a presentation in Abu Dhabi about a month ago, and the official briefing us put up a slide, and he showed us the top 5 companies in the U.S. 5 years ago, and it was Exxon, Citibank, General Motors, Johnson & Johnson, something like that. And then he showed us the world's top 5 companies today: Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook. And he said, because of this trend, because what we are witnessing, we are going to make it mandatory. We're inserting into our public education classes computer coding for our high school students.
I know you have things to say on this.
Well, I think the region is a business-focused region, so a lot of there's a huge culture of innovation within that space. But what I've noticed in Saudi, and I think it's because there's a lot of conflict within the social sphere. There's a lot of innovation and movement within a social entrepreneurship. Because what is entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship started off as creative problem solving. And solving problems that are, usually it's the founder's problem or the community around them. One of the things that the standouts, and actually the first, before Careem, before Souk, there was Glowwork. Glowwork was the first acquisition of a startup in Saudi Arabia. And the Glowwork's focus is helping women get jobs. So training them will help, because this is the first generation of women that are going to be going out to the workforce, doing interviews, getting income. being heads of households financially. So they do a huge training program, and they've been working with the government in order to help women bypass a lot of the obstacles when it comes to entering a global job market. And they've been able to, I can't get the numbers, I don't remember the numbers, but it's, think about like 5,000 women maybe that have been employed as a result of this movement. There's also volunteering. There's a huge culture of volunteering. I think we tend to forget that innovation or entrepreneurship doesn't have to also relate only to technology. It's human resources, and that's where the 70% comes in to play. Saudi, within education, they've been, the curriculums have evolved to include the concept of being a global citizen from day one. And by the time they reach an age where they can actually comfortably go out and volunteer, they've now been distributed and being sent all over the world to interact with the global community. And that's a whole other shift, again, from, it was, there was no agenda, it wasn't a government thing, it was the youth themselves. And it came as a result of various catastrophes that happened within Saudi, where they just ended up going to the streets and doing what our culture, our parents, and our religion taught us to do, which is to give back. And support each other. And that was really, I think, the first indication from the youth about, I think from the older generation, they saw the barriers were gone. It was young men and young women in the space together, publicly, working with each other. They've been, you know, nobody was harassing anyone. Nothing was you know, it was actually, you know, I think that honestly is, I think, what was the true propeller of the shift that's happening in Saudi today.
Before we move on from the topics both of education and sort of diversity and getting more inclusion in the workplace and getting more women online, which is of course an important part of economic growth in general, you have to share the story of your comic book division, and in particular the female heroine that you developed. My daughter writes comic books, so I have a particular affinity for this story.
Well, I mean, this came as a result of my experience with comic books. I learned English through reading comic books. X-Men is my favorite. I learned about diversity. I learned about challenges. I learned about, you know, all these different topics that we weren't really taught in school or even discussed with our parents. And, you know, that stayed with me well, now it's what I do. The power of images and symbolism and language is really important. The power of representation is a struggle and a conversation that's already even within the US is happening. And what we understand about content is content, saves lives, but it can also demonize them, and in some cases, you know, people will have a violent reaction to someone based on imagery. So what I wanted to do is I started a movement in a universe called Saudi Girls Revolution, and the reason I chose those words is because they're politically charged. They've been manipulated for generations, and what I wanted the focus is highlighting stories where all the protagonists are women. All the books are targeting various demographics of women to show the diversity within Arab women, but also women in general. And the driving factor behind the title is that I wanted the first movement and the first revolution and invite everybody to change is through the most marginalized woman around the world right now is a Saudi woman. The most limited woman, you know, when it comes to identity globally is a Saudi woman. So I wanted the revolution to start with them. And our first foray in this, we launched at Comic-Con last year, Latifa, which is, she's the first, I guess, Saudi superhero. She's
she's Comic-Con in Saudi.
Comic-Con in New York. And then and there's a Comic-Con in Saudi.
Yes, I want to know.
Yes,
there's a Comic-Con in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
well, that's the whole thing,
Yes.
and that's what it opened. That when the government decided to create the first movement towards this new 2030 vision that we're in, it chose comic books. It chose that space because it's entertainment, it's something that invites everybody, but it also understood the importance of messaging. So, to walk into Saudi Arabia and to see a Comic-Con and the first image you see is a 7-foot Saudi woman that's, not necessarily
awesome.
veiled or not veiled, but in cultural attire, kicking ass. Sorry, guys, I have to say that. It really changed, and there were women that were coming up to us in tears, and they were not necessarily, they were just, it was happiness. It was finally someone's hearing our voice. And I don't mean to speak or put myself in a position that I'm talking for anyone. It's just, I understand the privilege and the experience I have, and what I'm trying to do is just plant the seeds and invite other creatives to come on board and join us in retelling the story of women in cinema, in film, and entertainment, which again, even in Hollywood, we see a huge issue with that space.
Right, no, absolutely. You're nodding, Ambassador. Do you want to add to this?
I'm nodding because of a similar story. I think most of you saw the Nike ad a few months ago with the covered women.
Yeah.
We have a very strong, very well-established women's a jiu-jitsu program in the UAE. And among them, there's a lot of Emirati women jiu-jitsu fighters. So I get a call from someone that used to work with me, and she said, we have this great program. Do you think anybody in the US would be interested in doing something like Nike did with us? I mean, this is something that's kind of special. No one knows it. No one's seen it. So I called up the owner of Under Armour, and I said, would you be interested? We got a kind of a cool story to tell. Would be interested? He said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. And I connected him with the person, and they've been talking for the last couple of weeks, and I don't know whether it ends up being a commercial or a sponsor. I don't know, but the fact is, these international brands are now recognizing that, hey, we're not different. On the contrary. And I think this is really important to notice.
I want to piggyback off of this because there's, again, about misconception. There's a misconception that that region, especially the Gulf, that there's a lot of this conflict, that we don't really benefit from each other, that we don't support each other. But the initiative that you just talked about, what part of our the company, NAM's agenda is we do a lot of sponsorship programs. So because of the opportunity that they created, we were able to sponsor the first Saudi jiu-jitsu fighter, and she, I think, came in second place, and as a result ended up playing in Lisbon, and actually ended up also coming to the U.S. So that's what entrepreneurship is, and that's what building bridges looks like. And it might be something small, but you might not even know that this actually happened. But it is opening doors for all of us. So it's about building new ways to not only collaborate and exchange ideas and opportunities with the world, but also within the region.
And if this happened 20 years ago, nobody would know about it. But because it happens, and it happens on social media, and people can talk about it today, everybody else can find out about it.
Big megaphone. Let me ask the two other panelists here, what other stories do you think that we in the Western media in the U.S. and Europe are getting wrong economically and politically about the Middle East? What should we be saying that we're not? Go ahead.
Well, I think what should be done through the media is to really embrace the change that's happening in our region. Embrace that there are people who are trying to change, and they are doing their best to do that, instead of just focusing the media on the negative aspect of our region. Of course, media always want to put negative stories because, as they say, negative stories sells, but also it's important to highlight what we are trying to do as the youth, as the new generations.
Mohammed, what do you think?
In terms of misconceptions, that's the kind of... I think this just becomes very broad, but I think social media is kind of helping everyone navigate through kind of breaking those barriers again. I know that might sound redundant, but I think this is kind of showing that people are not kind of the villains that they see over kind of the news network.
Yeah, there's not this single storyline. Let me, go ahead.
May I just add something more? I mean, if you look at the panelists here, us, we are representing the change. in the region. And that's what we would like to put out. We are changing, and we are inviting you here in the US and in Europe to look at the change that is being done and support it, because we are really sincere about it.
Let me ask a couple of political questions. You know, we can talk a little bit about conflict in the region before we open it up to questions, because this obviously has an economic impact. Ambassador Prince, you all have both consulted around cybersecurity, security issues. Ambassador, you've done a lot of work with the U.S. government on conflict in the region. What's the trajectory? I don't even know where to begin with this question. What's the trajectory for the next few years? What can or should the U.S. be doing to make things better in Syria, to fight ISIS? What are we not doing that we should be?
So first, I'd like to point out that the panel went almost 3/4 of the time, about 45 minutes, where we didn't talk about terrorism, where we didn't talk about security.
Frankly.
We talked about opportunities, we talked about innovation, we talked...
Yeah.
Michael Crowley, I see you over there. I expect you to write a piece in Politico.
Michael Crowley, I know you. You better write, about this.
No, I expect you to write a piece saying that you attended a panel on Middle East where you didn't hear anything about security for at least 45 minutes. All right?
I know where you live.
I think, look, we would not be successful in all the stuff that we talked about here if we don't address our challenges and our threats. And our threats are, again, it breaks down into two fundamental threats. They haven't changed in a long time. I don't expect them to change anytime soon. It is Iran's behavior in the region, not Iran's nuclear program. It's how they are undermining us and many of our neighbors. And it's extremism. And it's extremism in all of its forms. We're going to fail to address terrorism if we do not look at the extremist ideology that supports it and enables it. Those are the two issues we have to fight, and we're going to have to fight them ourselves. Particularly extremism, because people are hijack our religion from us and then calling us infidels when we don't agree with their interpretation of Islam. So I want to be clear, there is a certain role for the U.S. to play. It is not deploying 100 or 200,000 troops to fight, and it's not spending billions of dollars. The fighting has been largely done by us, by Emirati soldiers and by Saudi soldiers. We're fighting in Yemen against both Al-Qaeda and against the Houthi rebels that are backed by Iran. We're fighting Al-Shabaab in Somalia. We're fighting ISIS in Libya. We're doing most of the fighting. What we need the U.S. to do is kind of quarterback the process.
What does that mean exactly?
To come into the room and say, all right, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do, you're going to do this, you're going to go that way. We need someone to be our coach, to be kind of spearheading the operation. When we see the U.S. disengage from the region, we see Syria. We see Russia stepping in. When we see the U.S. engaged, you get your U.S. partners back on the same team again. And I think we need to see the U.S. engaged. Engaged means leadership. It doesn't mean fighting. And I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Prince, what do you?
Well, I'm going to take a different route. I think you've talked about our responsibility and what we're doing. I'm going to focus on the global responsibility. I think not making it easy for young Arabs to be able to travel and invest in themselves and get an education and get experience. That's, you know, they say, oh, there's a huge unemployment rate. It's because, no, but that doesn't mean that they're not educated. They are educated, but either they can't leave the country, or if they go somewhere else, as soon as they graduate, they get kicked out. So it's again where the U.S. can contribute from an academic standpoint is you know, in a governmental standpoint is making it easier and inviting us to elevate ourselves and to evolve and to be incubated in ecosystems that allow us to express ourselves and challenge ourselves and help build solutions and collaboration. I think the concept of togetherness, you know, personally as a young person, I think I don't want to speak for my whole region, but I can say that there's a shared frustration of having to continuously tell people and help them understand that we're human. And we're, as much as we are part of a collective, we're individuals, and we have our hopes and our dreams. And what I would say is, if we were to take something away from America's legacy, is the American dream, is like, help us create the Arab dream, help us create the Saudi dream, the Kuwaiti dream, the Egyptian dream, the Libyan dream, because one, we're not all the same. And we all have our own cultures and challenges, and that's a beautiful thing. And at some point in time, we were sharing it and being proud of it, and the basis of a lot of sciences, math, culture, philosophy, art came from the region. So we've, I think we've proven ourselves over centuries that we have continuously produced. And this time, I think it's important for us to really give a chance. It's a lot of the conflict that exists in our region is inherited conflict. When I grew up, I didn't have any choices when I was born, I didn't choose the conflict that came before me, but I'm being forced to inherit it, both locally and globally. So I think it's changing that perception and understanding that we want to resolve, but we also want to move on.
Sheikh Mashhul, what do you think about the U.S. administration's actions, recently in the region, and what do you think the U.S. should be doing?
If I may just add on the issue of terrorism, please. I think I agree with His Excellency the Ambassador. However, we truly believe that fighting terrorism has a twofold. It has the military aspect, but we also need to address the root causes of it. We can continue using military means. However, if we do not address the root cause, it will drag on and on and on. I think the best way to face extremism in this region goes back to education. We need to educate our youth. We need to educate our youth. This is the main message. Tolerance. We come from a region that is really, the word of tolerance is not really understood. The ideas are not being accepted. It's either you accept my idea or you don't accept my idea.
Why?
Again, education. We need to train, educate our youth, our generations to accept the other. So that's what we are trying to do in Doha. Promote education, tolerance, fight extremism. Going back to your question about U.S. administration, I think we truly appreciate the engagement of the American administration. They understand the challenges that we are facing, and they understand them very well, and they act on them.
Okay. Mohammed?
In terms of geopolitics, there's not much that I can add with the presence of... But again, I just did to what His Highness and Their Excellencies kind of said. We grew up, that we were forced to kind of have these conflicts. Education is key. I come from Lebanon, so it's a purely inherently sectarian country. I had friends from different sects, but again, we only felt it recently when there was kind of a trigger from a political angle that made us kind of label people. I think the best way is to kind of unite and try to explain ourselves to globally. And I think turning the back on the region, which we kind of saw, and every time we look at Syria, we kind of, our eyes kind of bleed, is something that we're seeing now. Some actions are happening, and that we're seeing positive, hopefully, outlook out of it. At least what happened in Syria cannot kind of be ignored.
Okay. I think we've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure to take some questions around the room. The gentleman here.
Okay. Thank you. Back to the terrorism, I strongly agree with both ambassadors. I think if the administration during the Obama time had the will to step in with their leadership, we would not have seen Syria where it is today, and perhaps ISIS won't be even fractions. However, one thing I would like to add is the social injustice. This is an issue that has to be addressed in order to fight terrorism, because most of the terrorists, they turn out of frustration. I mean, most people who turn into terrorism, it's out of frustration for lack of injustice. So how would you address that?
Prince, do you want to start? Anybody in particular you want to take the question?
Again, each country has a different ecosystem and has different challenges. I can comment on Saudi and what I've seen, especially since we've had one of the most successful reform programs for extremists. I think it's basic needs. We can't ignore the bullying that they are being exposed to globally. So when you take, or that's step one, you strip their dignity. Two, there's social pressures and challenges on young men and women to live by a certain standard or a certain way that is not ideal anymore. Having to have a certain income to start a family, having, these frustrations, although to a lot of countries or a lot of individuals be like, that's not going to make me blow myself up. But some people, that gives, what it leads towards is hopelessness. And when you feel that you have nothing to lose, and then someone comes and offers you, these ideas, and you're part of a community, that's an immediate shift. So these are, we go back to Tunisia, if I'm not, where what started that whole thing. I mean, he could have easily, what's the difference between burning yourself and burning down a building? The trigger is the same. So I think, again, I'm speaking of the younger generation. Our struggle is we have a lot of pressure and a lot of expectations, and no resources or guidance or support systems, whether locally or globally, which is now being changed. And I have great faith in what we're going to do next. But I think those elements for me, because I think that's something that, again, hopelessness. And I go back to my company and why I called it Naam. Naam, it means yes in Arabic. Is, as you said, positive words, positive affirmations, positive identity, that does not exist in our communities. And it's changing, and I'll pass it to you.
Add something. I was sitting with a senior UAE official and having a conversation a while back, and he said to me, he goes, "You know what our job is in government?" I said, "No, what is it, sir?" He said, "Our job is, we're in the business of creating hope. And to the extent a government or a society can create hope, you address the injustices, you address the causes for people joining terrorist groups in the first place. And there isn't one solution. There isn't a magic formula. Every country has to address it a certain way. There are ISIS fighters from Syria and Iraq, but there are also ISIS fighters from Belgium and France. And I'm sure they're in there for different reasons. I think it's up to each country to address their own systems of social injustices, but we also have to recognize that many of us in government, we're in the business of creating hope for our younger generations.
Okay, question in the back, and then we'll take some up front.
Hi, on the topic of education as well, driving economic progress and technological progress in the region, how do you see your own governments pushing through help in the STEM sector, so science, technology, engineering and maths, and also perhaps art through teaching coding? You mentioned in the UAE now coding is becoming a requirement, and I'd like to know about Saudi and perhaps...
So, just happened. So my uncle is the head of the City of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. We've signed with Stanford Research Center a 15-year program that is going to introduce a lot of different solutions to these issues. We have KAUST, King Abdullah University, which is one of the big tech universities globally. Again, not good PR, maybe that's the problem, where we have students from all over the world coming. It's a great campus, it's by the water. We have the world's largest women's university with more than 40,000 academics inside, more higher education focused on IT, architecture, medicine, and business. So that's it. Like, it's happening. It really is happening. But again, the limitations to us, because we invest so much in our youth, or even in people from around the world, but then we can't send them out, and we can't connect them to you. And so if we resolve that situation, I think you'll see the whole region. If we look at Jordan, Jordan is one of the leaders in academia. Their baccalaureate school is the #1 baccalaureate school, the top baccalaureate school in the world. In the Middle East. Qatar baccalaureate school is, it's the same level as well. So we've been there. Again, this concept of we're not emerging markets, we're returning markets. We've been there. It's just about people need to open themselves to the possibility that something good is happening in our region.
Okay, there was a question up here.
Thank you, for Prince Fahd. I love the team at GlowWorks, and I spent some time in Jeddah with the women at the Jeddah Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and got some understanding of how they're trying to, for years now, move women forward in the workplace. And they mentioned how when it comes to trying to steer some more conservative attitudes and mainstream conservative attitudes in that direction, sometimes the law moves faster than the culture, sometimes the culture moves faster than the law. With technology now, of course, the culture has blazed a trail. Right. So just wondering, where do you see the conservative attitude toward women in the workplace perhaps changing, shifting toward this?
Good question.
I'll look at it as kind of when women entered the workforce here. When men came back from the war, women were asked to go back to the kitchen, if I'm not mistaken. So it's that same, it comes down to educating men and fixing the insecurities within them. First and foremost, re-educating men on how to make a working space safe for women. Teaching them how to interact in a respectable manner. One of my favorite protest posters happened, with the whole bus incident in India, where one woman was here. It's like don't blame our daughters, raise your sons, and I think that's the core of it. This is a new shift. This is a new environment. This has never happened before, and add to it the fear that someone's coming in to take my job. Women in Saudi or otherwise, I don't think have ever had any issues working anywhere or succeeding or creating a safe environment for everyone to kind of thrive. So I don't want to, I don't want to go too hard on men, but really in my community, I think that's the biggest aspect, and giving the proper tools to allow them to succeed and have a sustainable future, and understanding that that success, confidence is power, and that they're going to have to get used to having at least 4, 5, 6, 7 powerful women in that household. So it's re-education, honestly, and I think that for me is the biggest, the biggest problem that I would want to.
So we have
focus
one
on.
last question here, the lady with the pink scarf, and then we'll be at time.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, for your contributions. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm part Syrian. I grew up there all my life, and then I came here to study identity and education as it relates to the Saudi curriculum that I studied in. And I now run an institute on the brain and the mind. I'm very curious as to, the name of the panel is on new tactics for transforming economies in the Middle East and growth. And as we speak about leadership in the US and how they can help in leadership in the Middle East, I don't see any Arab women on the panel. And I'm curious from the Western side and the US side who planned the panel, did they go out and consider finding Saudis when we talk about US leadership, right? And symbols. And then I'm also curious from the Saudi and Arab and Egypt, Libya, all the Arab countries that you're representing. Did you think of some individuals that could have been maybe invited on the panel? Did you have the same question I'm having right now? I'm just genuinely curious.
That's a great, okay, so this is a good speed round. Name one Middle Eastern woman that should be on this panel next year. Mohammed, go. Sheikh Mashul.
Well, I think it's very important to have invitation to Arab women.
Is there a Qatari woman that you think should be invited to Milken next year?
There are plenty of Qatari women I can suggest, and I will talk to Milken Institute about it.
Okay, very good.
I'm going to say the same. I think I'm going to kind of cheat and throw three names as Princess Rima bint Bandar, and there's Safana Dahlan. There's, you know, if you want to target the younger generation, there's Adwa Dakhil, who's an inspiration to me and a friend. There's, if you want to target the arts, there's Rotana Tarabzuni. There is.
Okay, you need to plan this panel.
I'm just saying.
Because you're okay, Ambassador. Last word to you.
Well, my daughter couldn't make it. She's in school. But also, if she came, nobody else would be talking. So, no, my very good friend Reem Al-Hashimi, who's a Minister of State, she had a baby 2 days ago, so she couldn't make it. Yeah. Sham Al-Mazrou'i, our Minister of Youth, she's 23. She's the youngest minister in the world. Dubai Bilhol, who just graduated out of NYU, is heading to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship. That's the one thing we don't have a problem with, is a shortage of qualified women. On the contrary, the problem was finding the time for them to come all the way here amidst their 9 or 10 different positions and responsibilities.
Can I just add something that it's so easy to make this a problem within the region because the region has been plagued with having issues with women. But I mean, Milken itself has an incentive and has to add a larger number of percentage of female speakers. But this is a global problem. If you look at any global cabinet, if you look at any boardroom, there's always this problem. And the Women's March. If anything, to learn from it, the Women's March was an American issue that was taken globally, and women around the world, Arab women around the world, Saudi women specifically, if I'm going to talk about my sister and people that I know, marched because this is a global problem. And until we collectively, as a global community, commit to solving it, we're always going to point fingers, and we're always going to say, you're limited, you're not doing enough, you're not bringing more inclusion or diversity. And I think this is an opportunity for us, if we're going to end on this note, is to go back to the point of togetherness and start bringing this conversation to the people that need to make the decisions. Okay, well, here. Thank you all. Great panel. It's so nice to be on an optimistic panel about the Middle East. Okay, thank you. Thank you.